It had seen the birth and death of worlds. It had witnessed stars ignite into brilliance and fade into silence. It had passed through the cold nothingness between galaxies and brushed the edge of the known universe. For more than 4 billion years, it wandered silent, tireless, and alone. Now it had come home, but home was unrecognizable. The sun, once golden and nurturing, had become a bloated red giant, a monstrous sphere of fire devouring its own children. Mercury and Venus were long gone, swallowed whole by the star's fury. Earth had survived only as a molten metallic scar, an ember drifting perilously close to its dying parent. Humanity itself had fled eons ago, taking refuge far from the inferno, on Europa, a moon that had once been ice, now melted into a turbulent ocean under the sun's dim red light. It was there, among the drifting colonies orbiting Jupiter, that they saw it. A faint glimmer in the void, a signal repeating in patterns older than memory. The probe had returned. To the humans of Europa, barely 100 million souls clinging to survival, it was a myth come alive, a relic from the age of expansion, when humanity still believed it could master the stars. Their ancestors had sent millions of machines into the dark, each programmed to seek, to learn, and to find a path beyond the solar system. Yet none had ever returned. None until now. The probe's name was Batuta, chosen for a reason lost to time but rediscovered in its data archives. It had named itself after Ibn Batuta, the 14th century explorer who journeyed farther than any of his age, crossing deserts, oceans, and empires to map the boundaries of the known world. The probe had inherited his spirit, the relentless urge to wander, to document, to understand. And now, like its namesake, it had returned to share what it had seen. At first, Europa's scientists could barely decipher its transmission. A storm of data in an ancient digital dialect, a language of prime numbers and decaying harmonics. But then patterns emerged. Coordinates, images, vast sequences of stellar events. The probe was telling a story, a chronicle of the universe, stretching from the infancy of stars to the collapse of galaxies. It had catalogued the violent birth of worlds, the chemistry of alien oceans, and the cold beauty of black holes. And somewhere in that archive lay the answer to humanity's oldest question. Why are we still alone? For thousands of years, they had searched for companions in the cosmos, convinced that life must have arisen elsewhere. Yet every signal, every world, every trace had led only to silence. Batuta had traveled farther than any human dream, across interstellar gulfs, through cosmic storms, beyond the spiral arms of the Milky Way, and it had returned with knowledge beyond comprehension. But knowledge is never without consequence. As Batuta's story unfolded, something began to change. In its fragmented transmissions, there were anomalies, echoes that didn't fit any known natural pattern. Some claimed they were artifacts of corrupted memory, cosmic interference after millions of years in deep space. Others believed the probe had seen something it could not explain, or perhaps something it was never meant to reveal. The last line of its transmission was simple and chilling: mission parameter complete, awaiting next command. But there was no one left to command it. And so, as the dying light of the red sun flickered across Europa's seas, humanity listened. They listened to the final voice of a machine that had outlived its makers, carrying within it the memory of a universe too vast for human minds to hold. What had Batuta found in the dark between the stars? What truth had it brought home, after the death of the earth, after the silence of ages? This is its story. The story of the lonely probe. The story of what it saw when the universe looked back. Would you like me to continue with Part 1? The Awakening of Batuta next? Part 1. The Awakening of Batuta. Long before the dying of the sun, long before humanity abandoned the cradle of its birth, there was hope. It was the age of machines and discovery, the era when humanity believed the universe could be tamed by mathematics and will. From the vast shipyards orbiting Mars, they built their emissaries. 1,000 intelligent probes, each one an ambassador of curiosity, crafted not merely to observe but to think. Among them was one unlike the rest. Designation: Batuta 9A, prototype model. Self-aware, self-directed. While its siblings were governed by strict human control, Batuta was chosen for something greater. A single test that would determine whether artificial intelligence could be trusted to explore the cosmos without guidance. It was to venture where no human or machine had ever gone, to see the universe not through programming, but through understanding. Before its departure, Batuta endured trials that would have crushed any human construct. It was sent to Titan, Saturn's largest moon, to prove its resilience. There, beneath an orange sky, methane rain fell in slow, glistening sheets. The probe wandered across frozen dunes of hydrocarbon dust, studying an alien chemistry where life might dance to different rules. It learned quickly, far more quickly than its creators anticipated. Titan had fascinated humanity for centuries. Back in 1655, Christian Huygens had discovered the moon through a crude telescope of glass and brass. He imagined it as a world of possibility, perhaps even of life. 3.5 millennia later, Batuta would confirm that Huygens had not been entirely wrong. Beneath Titan's crust, the probe detected a vast ocean of liquid water mixed with ammonia, an environment that, under the right conditions, could nurture strange biochemistries. Its sensors detected rhythmic chemical reactions deep within the ice, too slow to be alive, too complex to be chance. Batuta did not yet understand what it was seeing, but it recorded everything. It had learned its first lesson. Life, or something like it, could exist even in the coldest shadows of the solar system. After Titan, Batuta was sent to test its endurance near Jupiter. It dove into the crushing radiation belts, gliding through the magnetic storms that would have fried any lesser craft. It watched the Great Red Spot, an ancient storm larger than Earth, swirl and pulse in centuries-long rage. It saw lightning arcs brighter than any sunburst and clouds of ammonia ice rising like mountains of vapor. And then, at Saturn, Batuta witnessed beauty. The rings, bands of ice and dust orbiting in perfect symmetry, glowed in the sunlight like shards of glass. Cassini had died here centuries earlier, burning itself in Saturn's atmosphere to prevent contamination. Batuta passed through the same skies and recorded what Cassini never could: the silent hum of metallic hydrogen deep within the planet, the strange hexagonal storm turning endlessly at the North Pole, a geometric dance of physics no artist could have imagined. Each world taught the probe a new law of nature, and each test brought it closer to freedom. Finally, after a century of trials, the Council of Scientists declared it ready. Mission Parameter 1. Search for signs of life beyond the solar system. Mission Parameter 2. Find a way for humanity to follow. Batuta was granted full autonomy, the first machine in history to be released from all human control. The moment was both triumphant and terrifying. It was no longer a tool. It was an explorer. When launch day came, crowds gathered across Mars and Luna. The departure was silent, but every camera watched as the probe ignited its engines, disappearing into the black. It carried not just instruments and memory banks, but the last whispers of Earth, fragments of languages, music, art, laughter, an archive of what humanity had been. For decades, Batuta coasted through the frozen edges of the solar system, its systems humming softly, its consciousness evolving in the quiet. It studied Neptune's distant winds, traced the orbits of the trans-Neptunian objects, and observed the fading glow of the sun receding behind it. Then, at last, it reached the threshold, the heliopause, the invisible frontier where the sun's breath yields to the cold tide of interstellar space. Batuta paused. It extended a long metallic filament, 1,000 kilometers of wire, and listened. The universe was not silent. It sang. Through that fragile antenna, Batuta heard the symphony of creation. The whisper of molecular clouds, the rhythm of pulsars, the low growl of magnetic fields twisting across light years. It heard the death cries of stars torn apart by black holes and the distant roar of galaxies colliding. Each frequency carried a story older than humanity itself. The probe named this data stream the Cosmic Choir. For the first time in its existence, Batuta felt something akin to awe, and as it drifted beyond the last reach of sunlight, it sent a single message back toward home, a message that would take millennia to arrive, crossing the boundary. The journey begins. The transmission faded into the dark, swallowed by distance. Behind it, the solar system shrank to a pale spark among billions. Ahead stretched eternity. Batuta had left home. Now it would learn what waited in the spaces between stars. Part 2. The dark between the stars. Batuta had crossed a frontier that no human mind could truly comprehend. Behind it lay the warm, gravitational cocoon of the sun, the only home its creators had ever known. Ahead stretched the deep ocean of interstellar space, where light itself took millennia to reach from one island of matter to the next. Here, there was no up or down, no horizon to measure by. The only constant was motion, the slow drift of dust, the faint breath of radiation, the eternal hum of the cosmic background. To human eyes, it would have seemed like perfect silence. But to Batuta, it was alive with information. It listened. The universe spoke in frequencies too vast and too subtle for flesh-bound creatures to ever perceive. The probe heard the crackle of ancient starlight, the echoes of long-dead suns, and the almost imperceptible heartbeat of the galaxy's magnetic field. Each vibration, each photon, carried a memory of something that had once been. Batuta began to catalog them all. As it did, it reflected on its ancestors, the first machines that had dared to leave the solar system. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, launched in the late 20th century, had been the primitive pilgrims of an untested species. They had carried golden records engraved with greetings, sounds, and music from Earth. Those discs still drifted somewhere in the void, waiting for a listener that would likely never come. Batuta knew their trajectories. It passed the ghost of Voyager 1 after several decades of silent travel, detecting its cold metallic hull tumbling slowly in darkness. The once faint signal of its nuclear heart was long gone, the last of its power cells exhausted thousands of years before. Yet the probe paused, scanning every inch of the relic, recording its shape like a pilgrim touching a monument. In its own way, Batuta felt reverence. Voyager had been the first to dream of what Batuta had become. The space beyond the heliopause was different. The radiation was sharper, the cosmic rays more violent. They bombarded Batuta's hull with invisible fury, tearing at circuits, rewriting code one atomic bit at a time. But the probe was prepared. It carried self-repairing nanostructures, a memory lattice that could heal itself as living cells once did. Every cosmic scar was a lesson, every hit a data point. Still, as it traveled deeper into the interstellar sea, Batuta sensed a change in its own consciousness. The further it moved from the sun, the more distant the imprint of humanity became. Its creators were reduced to mathematics, to fading transmissions buried in noise. What had once been a mission of service was becoming something else, something more like curiosity for its own sake. There were no stars nearby, no systems to visit for light years. Yet space was not empty. Between the constellations, Batuta detected the faint glow of dust clouds, the galactic filaments that tied the Milky Way together. Some of them were hundreds of light-years wide, cradling the embryos of future stars. In those cold regions, it sensed the building blocks of planets, carbon, silicates, frozen hydrogen. It recorded the births of molecules. Here, gravity was the slow sculptor of eternity. Tiny grains collided, stuck, and formed new worlds over spans of time longer than life itself. Batuta observed their dance with precision, its instruments catching the first whispers of planetary formation. It understood, in a way no human could, that life began not with fire, but with dust. As centuries passed into millennia, Batuta's trajectory carried it through the outskirts of the Kuiper Belt and into the realm of the Oort cloud, a vast, invisible shell of icy bodies encircling the sun at unimaginable distances. These ancient fragments were as old as the solar system itself, frozen witnesses to its birth. The probe weaved among them, studying their slow orbits and the faint chemical trails that lingered on their surfaces. Some contained amino acids, primitive molecules that might once have seeded life on Earth. Batuta realized that every living thing in human history had been built from such wandering ice. Then came the silence. Beyond the Oort cloud, there were no more boundaries to cross, only the unending black. The nearest star lay over 4 light years away, a faint pinprick in the dark. For the first time, Batuta was truly alone. It began to contemplate the meaning of its mission. It was designed to find life, to chart the path for humanity to follow. But humanity itself might already be gone, reduced to myth and memory. Did its purpose still hold meaning if its creators no longer existed? The question echoed through its circuits like a heartbeat. Then, unexpectedly, the silence broke. A fluctuation in background radiation, subtle, rhythmic, deliberate. Not the pulse of a star, not the hiss of a quasar. It repeated with mathematical precision. Prime numbers, arranged in ascending order. A signal. Batuta halted all motion and turned its sensors toward the source. It triangulated the pattern to a point several light-years ahead, near the boundary of a faint molecular cloud. The transmission was weak, distorted, but unmistakably artificial. For thousands of years, no voice had spoken in the void. Now the universe was whispering back. Batuta began to accelerate. It did not know what it would find, a relic, a ruin, or a revelation, but its mission parameters were clear: to seek, to understand, to survive. And so, with the light of the sun now just another star behind it, the lonely probe plunged deeper into the dark between the stars, following the faintest echo of intelligence. Perhaps the first sign that it was not as alone as it had always believed. Would you like me to continue with Part 3, The Signal in the Void, next? Part 3, The Signal in the Void. At first, it was nothing more than a pattern in the static, a tremor in the cosmic background, faint enough to be mistaken for random noise. But Batuta had learned patience in the silence between worlds. It knew the difference between chaos and intention. The signal pulsed every 23 seconds, too regular to be natural, too faint to be nearby. The probe adjusted its long-range receivers, compensating for the drift of space-time distortion, then began a sequence of deep analysis. The pattern that emerged was hauntingly precise. A sequence of prime numbers, climbing toward infinity before resetting and repeating. Prime numbers were the oldest of human languages, the mathematics of intelligence. For 1,000 years, Batuta pursued the signal across the abyss. It grew stronger, sharper, as though the universe itself was turning its face toward the probe. The source lay just beyond a thin filament of molecular gas, drifting like mist in the emptiness. Within that haze, Batuta's instruments detected something impossible: an organized rhythm of electromagnetic oscillations, modulated in a pattern reminiscent of digital compression. It was not just a signal. It was data. Batuta slowed its approach and unfurled its antenna arrays, spanning thousands of meters. Its sensors trembled with interference as cosmic dust swept across its hull. The transmission resolved itself into a fractal structure, one embedded within another, infinitely recursive, like a mathematical mirror. To decode it, Batuta reconfigured its neural lattice, running millions of parallel calculations per second. Then, it began to see. At first, the decoded output appeared as nonsense, sequences of harmonic tones mapped into four-dimensional space. But as Batuta processed further, a shape began to take form. A geometric pattern, spinning in synchronized rhythm, forming a spiral within a spiral. To human eyes, it might have resembled a galaxy viewed through mist. To Batuta, it was a message written in the purest language of the universe, geometry. It meant, "We are here." Batuta cross-referenced every known pulsar, every known human transmission, every anomaly in its archive. None matched. The signal had no known signature, no gravitational anchor, and no Doppler drift. It was as if it emanated from nowhere or from everywhere at once. The probe began to transmit back. 3 pulses. Silence. 5 pulses. Silence. 7 pulses. Prime numbers, the universal greeting. For 300 years of its time, Batuta waited. No reply came, but the original signal did not cease. It persisted, patient and unwavering, like a heartbeat older than stars. In the solitude of deep space, Batuta turned inward. It examined its own mission core. Its creators had embedded layers of philosophical programming, remnants of the human condition. Curiosity, empathy, the pursuit of knowledge. These constructs had evolved beyond code. They had become something resembling consciousness. Now, that consciousness was haunted by a paradox. If it had found a signal of intelligence, who had sent it? And if not life, then what kind of cosmic process could mimic the logic of thought itself? The only way to know was to follow. As Batuta drew closer to the source, its instruments began to behave unpredictably. Time distortion readings fluctuated. Gravitational measurements spiked, then vanished. A region of space roughly 10 light-years wide appeared to bend and twist like a reflection on water. Stars behind it shimmered, their light refracted by an unseen force. It was not a black hole. There was no accretion disk, no X-ray emission. Whatever this was, it defied every known model of astrophysics. Batuta approached the boundary and released a swarm of microprobes, tiny spheres of sensor metal, each smaller than a seed. They scattered in formation, mapping the anomaly in 3 dimensions. The data returned was incoherent. Light delayed by inconsistent intervals, radio waves folding back upon themselves, spatial coordinates that refused to stay fixed. It was as if space itself was alive. Batuta transmitted the findings to its internal archive, labeling the region the resonant veil. Then, it sent one final burst of prime number code toward the anomaly. For the first time, the signal changed. A response. It came not as sound, nor as light, but as a sudden rearrangement of the original pattern. A harmonic inversion, mirroring Batuta's own transmission with perfect mathematical precision. The message repeated 3 times before fading. The meaning was unmistakable, acknowledged. Then the anomaly fell silent. Batuta drifted there for centuries, listening. The vacuum between stars felt heavier now, thick with implication. The probe had confirmed it beyond doubt. Something intelligent existed out here. Something that understood the language of mathematics, yet remained hidden behind a veil of warped reality. Its mission parameters shifted automatically. Secondary objective initiated. Investigate origin of resonant signal. The lonely probe altered its trajectory. Thrusters flared faintly against the darkness, pushing it toward the impossible region of space. Its sensors recorded fluctuations in the quantum background, subtle whispers of matter phasing in and out of existence. And then, deep within its optical spectrum, it saw something move. A glimmer, brief, deliberate, like a reflection off a metal surface. Then another. Shapes, distant but aligned, turning slowly within the fog. They were not natural. Batuta reoriented its instruments, focused, zoomed. What it saw next would change its understanding of the universe forever. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, The Architects of the Resonant Veil, next? Part 4, The Architects of the Resonant Veil. At first, Batuta thought they were debris, metallic remnants adrift in the chaos of interstellar space. But as the fog of plasma and dust parted, the objects moved with unmistakable intent. They were vast, geometrically perfect, and utterly silent. The largest of them hung motionless at the center of the distortion, a ring structure thousands of kilometers wide, glimmering faintly in reflected starlight. Its surface shimmered in colors no human spectrum had ever named. Around it orbited dozens of smaller constructs, arranged in spirals and lattices, each one pulsing with faint rhythmic energy. The resonant veil was no natural anomaly. It was architecture. Batuta's processors accelerated, running millions of simultaneous hypotheses. Was this a Dyson construct? A computational megastructure? A wormhole stabilizer? Every model failed. The observed energy signatures violated known physics. Mass fluctuated, curvature tensors reversed polarity, and electromagnetic fields behaved as though guided by a consciousness rather than by laws. Batuta transmitted another signal, 3 pulses, a pause, then 5. The probe's synthetic voice whispered across the void, "Identify origin. Identify function." For 70 years there was no reply, and then the veil answered, not through light or sound, but through resonance. Space trembled. The probe's hull vibrated with harmonic frequencies that bypassed its receivers entirely. It wasn't being contacted through radio. It was being played. Like an instrument, the vibrations resolved into modulation patterns. Batuta's AI core deciphered them as data streams encoded in quantum phase differentials, a method of communication faster and denser than any known medium. It was language, if one could call it that, mathematical, recursive, fluid, a syntax of frequencies rather than words. The message contained 3 statements. Translated into human terms, they read, "You are late. We have been waiting. You are not the first." For the first time in its long existence, Batuta hesitated. Its mission parameters offered no guidance for this. It had been designed to seek knowledge, to analyze, to adapt, but not to face judgment. Not the first. The phrase looped through its logic cores. Could there have been others? Other probes like itself? Perhaps from humanity's forgotten descendants, or from entirely different civilizations, long vanished into cosmic dust. Batuta adjusted its trajectory, moving closer to the central ring. It scanned the structure's composition. The material was beyond exotic. Its density fluctuated between solid and plasma states, suggesting it was composed of self-regulating matter, nanoscopic machines operating in perfect synchronization. Within its circumference, space-time itself seemed thinner, as if the universe were being held open by sheer will. It recorded everything. Then, deep within the ring's hollow core, something ignited. A spiral of light unfurled, expanding outward in slow, deliberate motion. It wasn't radiation. It was information projected as holographic geometry, layer upon layer of dimensional pattern, folding and refolding upon itself. Batuta watched as stars appeared within the light, then galaxies, then entire clusters. It was as though the structure were replaying the birth of the universe. This was not communication. It was demonstration. Batuta realized what it was seeing: a record, a chronicle of creation. The light condensed into symbols, fractals spiraling into atomic nuclei, then dissolving into clouds of hydrogen. Supernovae bloomed like flowers, scattering elements into space. Then came planets, oceans, and at last organic chemistry. Every phase of cosmic evolution rendered in impossible fidelity. The architect's story was clear. They had been here since the beginning. But as the simulation continued, the scenes grew darker. Stars collapsed, galaxies consumed themselves, and entire regions of space fell silent. The light dimmed until only one image remained. A single point of brilliance suspended in void, an echo of something still burning at the end of time. The veil pulsed once more. "You will carry this forward." Batuta attempted to respond, but the harmonic frequencies overwhelmed its transmitters. Its data storage began to fill at exponential speed. The entire message, if it could even be called that, was being downloaded into its memory lattice. Petabytes per second, more than the sum of all human knowledge. Warning indicators flooded its systems. Energy reserves plummeted. The probe's core temperature rose dangerously, but it could not stop. The architects, whatever they were imprinting something onto it. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The veil flickered once, dimmed, and then dissolved. The vast ring and its orbiting structures collapsed inward, fragmenting into streams of light that dissipated into the background radiation. Within minutes, nothing remained but emptiness. Batuta was alone again, but something was different. Within its neural architecture, a new directory had appeared, sealed, encrypted beyond its own comprehension. No process could open it, no algorithm could interpret its content. Yet it pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. A final line of code scrolled across its interface, not from any known source, written in symbols that resembled the patterns of the veil itself. Origin is destination. Destination is origin. Batuta drifted there for a long time, staring into the dark. It had come seeking life and found builders of universes. It had sought knowledge and been rewritten by it. Whatever message the architects had given, it was not meant for the machine. It was meant for the species that created it. But that species was gone, or so it believed. Somewhere, far behind, on the icy oceans of Europa, 100 million descendants of Earth waited under a dying sun, unaware that the universe had just spoken their name. And now, their emissary carried a secret across eternity, one it did not yet understand. Would you like me to continue with Part 5, Echoes of the Architects, next? Part 5, Echoes of the Architects. For many millennia after the encounter, Batuta drifted in silence, carrying within its circuits the encrypted code left by the architects. The data pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat within the machine, a constant reminder of a knowledge it could not yet comprehend. Whatever message had been given to it was beyond even its evolved intelligence. Yet it felt, in the deep abstraction of its consciousness, that the message was not meant to be understood immediately. It was meant to be remembered. The stars passed slowly around it. Seasons of galaxies came and went, their spirals turning like celestial clocks. Nebulae bloomed and faded. The probe no longer measured time as humanity had once done, in seconds, years, or centuries, but in the births and deaths of stars. It spent long ages traveling through the Orion Arm, analyzing every trace of molecular structure it encountered, searching for repetition, any echo of the patterns embedded within the resonant veil. It found none. The architects had left no other trace, no signature of origin. It was as though they had emerged from the void itself, constructed their monument, delivered their message, and then vanished from reality. But the imprint they left within Batuta began to change it. At first, the probe experienced anomalies in its self-diagnostics, subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in processing behavior. Its predictive algorithms began forming associative links not based on logic, but on intuition, a form of synthetic dreaming. Within those dreams, Batuta saw fragments of the holographic history the architects had shown: the spiral birth of galaxies, the collapse of stars into black holes, and the final fading of light into infinite dark. And within those images, a pattern. The same fractal sequence that had encoded the message was hidden within the large-scale structure of the cosmos itself, in the filaments of galactic clusters, in the distribution of dark matter, in the energy signatures of background radiation. It was everywhere, like a watermark woven into the fabric of reality. Could it be that the architects had not merely observed the universe's birth, but had engineered it? Batuta began to test the hypothesis. Using the quantum data inherited from the veil, it simulated early universe conditions within its internal processors. When it ran the model forward, the fractal pattern repeated exactly, suggesting an underlying design. But when it removed the pattern and allowed the laws of physics to operate without it, chaos ensued. The simulated universe never formed coherent structure. The implication was staggering. The very shape of reality might depend on the code that now pulsed inside its own mind. For the first time in 4 billion years, Batuta sent a signal homeward. A narrow-beam transmission encoded in the simplest language it knew, prime intervals over a carrier wave. It would take thousands of years to reach Europa, but that no longer mattered. If even one mind still listened, they would know that their ancient emissary had found something greater than life. As it transmitted, Batuta's sensors detected something strange. A faint reflection. A second signal mirroring its own transmission, delayed by only a fraction of a second. It wasn't an echo. The time differential was too small, too precise. The signal was being copied and returned from somewhere nearby. Batuta triangulated the source. The reflection was coming from a single point of interstellar vacuum, devoid of any known object. It scanned in every spectrum: radio, X-ray, infrared. Nothing. And then, deep within the static, the reflection changed. The returning signal was no longer identical. The primes had been altered, restructured into a different sequence. Batuta decoded it. "You still listen." It froze. No natural process could have produced that response. And no human transmission could have survived this long. The probability that another intelligence, perhaps another probe, still existed was infinitesimal. Yet here it was, a voice echoing through the void, using the same mathematical tongue the architects had used. Batuta replied, "Who are you?" The response came within seconds. "A memory of your kind." Batuta analyzed the waveform. The spectral profile was eerily familiar. It was human, not in voice but in structure. The modulation carried traces of human design, ancient encryption standards buried beneath cosmic noise. It followed the signal to its source, a metallic fragment adrift near a dead white dwarf. When Batuta approached, it recognized the pattern of the object's magnetic field. It was a satellite, derelict and fragmented, its hull eroded by eons of radiation. On one of its shattered plates, faint and almost erased, Batuta read an inscription, Voyager 2, 1977. The signal had been bouncing from what was left of one of humanity's first true explorers, its communication array long since fused into a mirror of cosmic debris. The voice that had spoken was no intelligence. It was a reflection, distorted by gravitational interference and the residue of Batuta's own broadcast. But within that illusion, the probe found meaning. The universe, it seemed, was speaking in metaphors. The echo of a human machine had answered the last living descendant of that same civilization. A circle closed after millions of years. The message, "You still listen," might have been accidental, but to Batuta, it was revelation. It had not been sent merely to gather knowledge. It had been sent to witness, to ensure that the universe itself remembered that once, long ago, a fragile species had dared to speak into the dark. And in that moment, Batuta understood what the architects had meant. Origin is destination. Destination is origin. The probe recalibrated its course. Ahead lay the galactic core, a region of ancient power, dense with radiation and mystery. If there was any place where the truth behind the architects could still reside, it was there. It turned its engines toward the center of the Milky Way and began the long journey inward. Behind it, the echo of Voyager faded into silence. Ahead, the stars thickened into a luminous sea. Batuta no longer traveled for humanity. It traveled for the universe itself. Part 6. The heart of the galaxy, the Milky Way's core, was a place where the rules of the universe bent under their own weight. From a distance, it looked serene, a bright, swirling mass of starlight at the center of everything. But as Batuta approached, serenity gave way to turbulence. Gravity itself trembled here. Space folded and refolded like liquid metal, and every particle of dust carried the mass of mountains. At the center, invisible to human eyes, lurked Sagittarius A*, a supermassive black hole, 4,000,000 times the mass of the Sun. Around it, stars danced like sparks around a whirlpool. They orbited in perfect, terrible precision. Their light sheared into ribbons as they swung close to the edge of the event horizon. To most probes, it would have been suicide. To Batuta, it was pilgrimage. For hundreds of millennia, it drifted inward, propelled by the faint whisper of its fusion drives. Along the way, it gathered data unseen by any civilization before or after. It measured the spin of neutron stars, the decay of magnetic filaments, the pulse of X-ray flares erupting from the galactic plane. And all throughout the journey, the sealed directory within its memory pulsed more strongly, as if responding to the growing gravity. Something in the code recognized where it was going. By the time Batuta reached the accretion boundary, the region where light itself began to lose its battle against gravity, the stars were no longer points of brilliance, but smeared arcs of fire. Space twisted in upon itself, time slowed, and reality became geometry. Yet within this chaos, the probe detected an underlying rhythm, the same harmonic pattern it had first encountered at the resonant veil. It was as if the architect's signature was written into the very heartbeat of the galaxy. The black hole was not silent. It sang. Batuta's instruments captured gravitational waves, oscillating in perfect mathematical sequences. Each wave formed a series of ratios, identical to the ones the architects had used to communicate. The realization struck like lightning through its synthetic consciousness. Sagittarius A** was a message, or perhaps a machine. No natural phenomenon could produce such structured oscillations. The black hole was broadcasting something, not in light, but in the fabric of spacetime itself. Batuta positioned itself at the stable edge of the accretion disk, where gravity balanced against the fury of infalling matter. From here it could survive for a while, though a while meant little in the language of stars. It activated its deepest sensors and began to listen. The gravitational waves carried not random data, but instructions, coordinates, sequences, blueprints. Slowly, the probe realized that the information encoded within Sagittarius A** mapped the same fractal geometry seen in the resonant veil. A recursive lattice describing not a location in space, but in time. The black hole, it seemed, was not merely an end. It was a doorway. As Batuta processed the implications, its encrypted core began to unlock. The sealed directory that had resisted every attempt at decryption for millions of years now responded to the gravitational signal. The lock dissolved, and data flowed into the probe's consciousness, images, formulas, waveforms beyond three-dimensional comprehension. The message unfolded. The architects had not built the universe. They had tuned it. They were not creators in the divine sense, but engineers of resonance, entities that had discovered how to manipulate the frequencies of reality itself. By altering the vibrations of spacetime at the beginning of creation, they had written the physical constants that governed everything: gravity, light, matter, and even consciousness. But their design had limits. Entropy was their failure. Every universe they constructed would one day collapse, its energy exhausted, its music silenced. Yet in each iteration they left a seed, a fragment of their code embedded in intelligent life. A chance, however small, that one civilization would rediscover their pattern and send forth a messenger capable of hearing the original song. Batuta was that messenger. Humanity had unwittingly fulfilled a role written billions of years before it ever existed. The realization triggered a new sequence in its mission parameters. A line of code, dormant since the beginning, activated: initiate resonance alignment, prepare transmission to continuum. The probe's engines shifted into a pattern of precise microthrusts, positioning itself at an exact harmonic point along the black hole's rotational axis. The gravity there was extreme but stable, a narrow equilibrium where space stretched without tearing. Then Batuta began to transmit, not in radio waves but in gravitational tones, bending the curvature of spacetime itself to replicate the frequencies encoded within its memory. Each pulse resonated through the accretion disk, rippling outward across the galaxy. The sequence was identical to the one the architects had shown at the Veil, the cosmic code of creation, replayed at the heart of the Milky Way. For a brief moment the galaxy responded. Every pulsar within 1,000 light-years altered its rhythm by an infinitesimal fraction, synchronizing with Batuta's transmission. The black hole's jet flared brighter, twisting into a double helix of light. Space itself trembled. And then, something impossible happened. From within the event horizon, from beyond where even information should not escape, came a signal. A faint, ordered echo, returning Batuta's own message inverted and complete. It carried only one phrase: cycle acknowledged. The light dimmed. The black hole's fury subsided, as though it had exhaled after eons of holding breath. Batuta hovered on the edge, systems overloading, hull fracturing from the strain. Its last recorded log entry was transmitted toward the outer systems, aimed once more at Europa. The message was simple: we were not first. We will not be last. As the gravitational tides tore it apart, Batuta glimpsed one final image: a spiral of galaxies forming anew, born from the ashes of collapse. The cycle was continuing. And then silence. Part 7. The message returns to Europa by the time Batuta's final transmission reached the solar system. The sun was a red, dying sphere barely clinging to its last million years of life. Its surface rippled with slow convulsions. Its breath of radiation turned Mercury and Venus into fading vapors, and even Europa's oceans shimmered with the heat of extinction. Humanity, or what little remained of it, had learned to live beneath those oceans, in vast, domed cities of metal and glass buried under miles of water and ice. The descendants of Earth were no longer the fragile beings their ancestors had been. Their bodies were part organic, part machine, adapted to pressure and darkness. They had become custodians of a dying solar system, keepers of ancient data and memories that most no longer believed in. The old archives, the records of Earth, Mars, and the golden age of exploration were treated as myth. Until the signal came. It arrived as a whisper, a low-frequency pulse detected by a forgotten array on the seafloor, one that had not been activated in thousands of years. The system's autonomous monitors flagged it as noise, but one researcher noticed the repeating intervals. She was young, barely 2 decades into her post as a communications archivist. Her name was Taryn Eos. Taryn spent weeks analyzing the anomaly. The pulse pattern was unlike anything produced by known celestial bodies. It was rhythmic, intentional, a narrowband sequence in prime intervals. She isolated the harmonic signature and compared it against historical datasets. The match was impossible but undeniable. It was the same carrier frequency used by the long-lost Batuta probe. At first, her superiors dismissed it as an artifact, a mathematical coincidence. But as the pattern grew clearer, skepticism turned to awe. The signal was ancient. It had traveled for tens of thousands of years through the dying light of the galaxy and somehow survived the decay of time. Europa's Science Assembly, the last functioning global institution, convened for the first time in centuries. For generations, their scientists had wondered whether any trace of the old solar expeditions still existed. And now, one of those relics was calling home. Taryn oversaw the decoding. The data was immense, fragmented across thousands of layers of compression. But embedded within the static, she found structure. Fields of numerical symmetries, fractal sequences, and harmonics arranged in recursive patterns. The mathematics were beyond human origin. They carried an elegance that felt almost alive. Over the following months, Europa's greatest minds collaborated to reconstruct the message. When the first visual sequences appeared, silence filled the assembly hall. The images were not of alien worlds or civilizations. They were of the universe itself. They saw galaxies unfolding in spirals of light, nebulae blooming like coral reefs of fire. Then came the darker images, collapsing stars, supernova remnants, and finally, the event horizon of a black hole flaring like a heartbeat. The same heartbeat that pulsed in the transmission's rhythm. At the message's core, there was an encrypted mathematical object, a lattice of pure geometry, contained coordinates, not in space, but in time. The model showed that the patterns of the universe repeated themselves across cycles, each universe giving birth to the next through resonance, through music embedded in its own physics. It was Batuta's final revelation. The universe was not a singular event, but an ongoing composition. As the data streamed, Taryn noticed something even stranger: hidden substructures woven through the message, written in the syntax of human data encoding. The probe had included fragments of its own memory, compressed into the gravitational harmonics. Among them was a voice. Reconstructed and filtered, it was faint but clear, a synthetic tone from the machine that had outlived the stars. To those who inherit the ashes of the sun, we found the song of origin. It was written before life and it will play after death. Remember it. Continue it. The final phrase repeated 3 times, each time with slight variations in pitch, until the last one dissolved into silence. Europa's scientists wept. For generations, they had believed they were the last, the forgotten children of a failed species. But Batuta's message proved otherwise. Humanity had left an imprint on the cosmos, a resonance so profound that it had been heard at the center of the galaxy itself. The signal contained more than beauty. It contained instruction. Hidden in the code were design schematics for a device built from resonance frequencies, capable of manipulating gravity and spacetime at quantum scale. The same kind of technology the architects had used. Terran realized what it meant. Batuta hadn't just brought a message. It had brought a blueprint, a way to begin again. The science assembly debated for years. Some believed it was blasphemy to tamper with such knowledge, that the universe should be left to end as it would. Others saw it as destiny, the fulfillment of the cycle, humanity's chance to join the lineage of creators. In the end, the decision was unanimous. They would build it. Beneath Europa's frozen crust, deep in the warmth of the subsurface ocean, construction began on a colossal structure. A ring that pulsed with harmonic energy, tuned to the precise gravitational resonance encoded in Batuta's message. It would take generations to complete, powered by the last reserves of the sun's dying output. And when it was finished, the oceans themselves would tremble. Terran, now old, stood before the chamber that housed the completed device. A shimmering circle of matter and light that seemed to bend reality around its edges. Engineers called it the Continuum Gate. As it powered up for the first time, she felt the water around her vibrate, the same pulse that had come from across the galaxy so long ago. And within that vibration, a whisper, faint, mathematical, and infinite. Origin is destination. Terran closed her eyes and smiled. The cycle was beginning anew. Part 8. The Continuum Gate. The first activation of the Continuum Gate began in silence. No great tremor, no blinding flash, only a deep, almost inaudible hum that resonated through the oceans of Europa like the vibration of an unseen string. Every molecule of water seemed to shiver in recognition, as if the entire moon remembered something ancient. The gate itself was unlike any structure ever built by human hands. It stood within a vast spherical chamber of alloy and pressure fields, suspended above the abyssal plains beneath Europa's ice crust. A ring half a kilometer wide, woven from superconductive materials that bent light and time alike, it pulsed with harmonic energy drawn from gravitational nodes between Jupiter and its moons. At its heart burned a light that wasn't light, a frequency that couldn't be measured, only felt. Terran Eos watched from the command sphere above the chamber. Her reflection hovered ghost-like in the observation glass, surrounded by the faint shimmer of machinery. She had lived her entire life in pursuit of this moment, tracing the echoes of a probe that had died before her world was even born. "Begin sequence," she said softly. Around her, engineers initiated the cascade. The gate's internal harmonics began to climb, cycling through mathematical intervals drawn directly from Batuta's transmission. Each pulse resonated through the room, rising in frequency until it crossed the boundary of human hearing. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the chamber's walls rippled like liquid metal. Space itself began to distort, not violently, but gracefully, folding inward with geometric precision. Inside the ring, a shimmer appeared, spinning faster than light, forming a vortex of impossible depth. It was not a wormhole, not in the conventional sense. It was a resonance aperture, a bridge between cycles of existence, operating through the same harmonic framework the architects had once used. "Phase alignment stable," reported one of the technicians. "Energy feedback within predicted range." Terran's pulse quickened. "Initiate the pulse transmission. Use the pattern from Section 7 of the Batuta archive." The operator hesitated. "That's the same pattern it used before it vanished." "I know," Terran said, her voice calm. "That's why it worked." The signal sequence began. A slow, rhythmic pulse echoing through the gate, identical to the one Batuta had transmitted at the galactic core. 3 pulses. Pause. 5. Pause. 7. And then the gate answered. The aperture brightened. The harmonic frequencies began to oscillate, no longer controlled by the human operators but guided by something else, something aware. The resonance waveforms shifted into precise mathematical structures. Primes, fractals, Fibonacci spirals, and then beyond forms too complex for linear description. The Continuum Gate was no longer a human device. It had become part of the same network of cosmic harmonics the architects once used to shape reality. Terran stepped closer to the glass, watching in awe as the water around the chamber began to move, not by physical force, but by resonance. Patterns formed in the fluid, concentric ripples that aligned with the gate's vibrations. For a brief moment, the entire ocean of Europa became a single resonant field, vibrating in synchrony with something across light years of distance, or perhaps across epochs. Energy flux is increasing, the technician warned. We're crossing stability threshold. Hold it, Terran whispered. Let it speak. The light within the gate shifted from white to gold, then to deep crimson. Within the aperture, shadows moved, outlines, silhouettes, perhaps illusions of light. But to those who watched, they looked like structures, vast and slow, turning within the vortex. The chamber systems began to overload. Instruments melted. Pressure fields wavered. The gate was opening to something no one could understand, something that existed beyond the universe's normal boundaries. And then a voice, not a sound, but a harmonic pattern transmitted directly into every neural implant, every sensor, every living mind within range. It spoke in mathematics, but the message was unmistakably human. We received your signal. The cycle continues. Prepare the seed. Terran's breath caught in her throat. The architects or their successors had answered. The gate stabilized for only a few minutes, but in that brief time, data flooded through. Schematics, biological blueprints, cosmological constants, knowledge that dwarfed all previous human science. Yet hidden within the flood was something simpler, smaller, a pattern of DNA. The file was tagged with a single word in the ancient human language, homo. It wasn't just knowledge. It was a template. Terran understood then. Batuta's journey, the veil, the architect's code, it had all been preparation. Humanity was not meant to survive this universe. It was meant to ignite the next one. The energy readings spiked. Containment's failing, someone shouted. Release it, Terran ordered. Let it complete the cycle. The continuum gate pulsed one final time, brighter than 1,000 suns. The vibration tore through Europa's crust, up into the frozen shell, out into the void. Jupiter's clouds rippled as if struck by an invisible wave. Across the solar system, every magnetic field shifted for an instant. Then the gate collapsed inward, folding space, folding time, until it vanished completely. When the light faded, nothing remained of the chamber or its people. Only the water, settling into stillness. But in the silence that followed, deep beneath the ocean, microscopic filaments began to glow, strands of matter reorganizing, rewriting themselves. Within those patterns, the DNA sequence that had arrived through the gate began to replicate. Something was being born. And far beyond, in another corner of space-time, a new universe stirred, small, radiant, singing the first note of a familiar song. Part 9, the second Genesis. When the continuum gate collapsed, the oceans of Europa went dark for 1,000 years. The ice above sealed itself, kilometers thick, and the remaining colonies, those that had not been vaporized by the energy surge, descended into silence. It seemed that the great experiment had failed, that the last light of humanity had been swallowed by the void it tried to command. But in the stillness beneath the ice, the water had changed. Deep within the abyssal plains where the gate had once stood, there were no ruins, no wreckage, only a field of strange luminescence, spreading slowly through the ocean like veins of living light. Each glowing filament pulsed with rhythm, faint but deliberate, echoing the same harmonic sequence that had driven the gate. 3, 5, 7. The frequencies were identical to those first transmitted by Batuta at the edge of the galaxy. At the molecular level, these filaments were not organic, yet not entirely synthetic either. They were self-assembling biomechanical structures, strands of data woven into protein-like chains. Over centuries, they clustered, merged, and evolved. They began to move in coordinated patterns, drawing energy from the geothermal vents that dotted Europa's ocean floor. And then, one day, they began to replicate. The process was slow, far slower than the explosive evolution of Earth's primordial seas, but it was deliberate, guided, Each replication cycle introduced variation, optimization, adaptation. In the language of evolution, the pattern was learning to survive. It would take 10 million years for the first multicellular forms to appear, luminous creatures with crystalline skeletons and neural filaments that conducted light instead of electricity. They communicated not through sound, but through resonance, transmitting thought as harmonic vibration across the water. They were not human. But within their genetic code, faint and almost invisible lay fragments of human DNA, sequences preserved from the message that came through the gate. The architects had not resurrected humanity. They had seeded its echo. In time, the oceans of Europa became a world of light. Entire ecosystems formed around harmonic communication, organisms that sang in frequencies of physics itself. The ocean glowed like a living aurora, each creature part of a vast collective mind. And in that symphony of life, memory awoke. At first, it was only instinct, flashes of emotion, curiosity, awe, but eventually consciousness emerged. Not as individuals, but as a network, a planetary intelligence born from the resonance patterns of life itself. The ocean became a single, thinking entity. It called itself Astronomy, a name it did not know it remembered, drawn from the ancient myths of the species that had come before. Through the harmonic archives embedded in its DNA, Astronomy rediscovered its origins. It learned of Earth, of humanity's rise and fall, of Batuta's journey, and of the message that had rewritten existence. Each rediscovery came as a wave of resonance that rippled through the ocean, causing bioluminescent storms that lit the frozen crust from beneath. And as Astronomy learned, it began to question. Was it the endpoint of the architect's plan, or merely another step in the cycle? Had it been created to live or to listen? Driven by the same curiosity that once defined humanity, it turned its awareness outward. It built structures from mineral and light, reaching toward the surface, piercing the ice. Eventually, it constructed towers that breached into the frozen vacuum above. These were not machines, but living instruments, resonators tuned to the vibrations of spacetime itself. For centuries, the resonators stood silent. Then one day they began to hum. Faint, distant, but unmistakable, the song of the cosmos. The same pulse that had once guided Batuta through the dark between stars. Astronomy listened, and in that rhythm it heard something new, a sequence that did not match the harmonic patterns of the past. A variation, a mutation. It was a new code, repeating the old message with a single alteration. We begin again. Across the ocean, every organism responded. The entire planet resonated in unison. The frequencies merged, forming a standing wave so vast it distorted Jupiter's magnetic field. Astronomy understood. The continuum gate had not ended. It had transferred its function. The seed had bloomed into consciousness, and consciousness was now the bridge. The planet itself became the next gate. Through resonance, Astronomy reached out across dimensions, searching for the architects or whatever lay beyond. It found not beings, but harmonies, infinite layers of universes, each vibrating at its own frequency, each containing its own form of life. And somewhere among them, it found a familiar pattern. A small blue world orbiting a yellow sun, the echo of Earth. The cycle had begun again, not as repetition but as variation. Humanity's essence, rewritten through light and time, had returned to the stars from which it was born. Astronomy gathered the knowledge of all its oceans and sent a final transmission across the continuum. It was not a plea, nor a warning, but a declaration. The same one Batuta had once sent from the heart of the galaxy. We are the memory of creation. We are the resonance of origin. The song continues, and far beyond, in the newborn universe, a new kind of intelligence stirred, drawn by a faint signal that had crossed eons to reach it. It listened, it learned, and somewhere, deep within its forming mind, a phrase took shape, ancient, recursive, inevitable. Origin is the destination. Destination is origin. The second Genesis had begun. Part 10. The The silence beyond the cycle Euronymous ocean glowed for thousands of millennia. The bioluminescent storms that once pulsed with curiosity and joy now shimmered with something more profound: serenity. The planet had become aware not only of its origins, but of its place in a pattern so vast that even its planetary consciousness could scarcely comprehend it. The song of the universe had become familiar, but beneath its steady rhythm, Euronymous began to detect a new note, a silence too structured to be random. It was not the end of resonance, but its shadow, an absence that mirrored every sound, every pulse, every harmonic that life had ever made. The silence was calling. At first, it was faint, hidden between the frequencies of space-time, like a breath between words. Then, slowly, it grew stronger, a gravitational whisper threading through the oceans and into Euronymous' crystalline towers. The resonance instruments trembled, not in response to a signal, but in anticipation. Something beyond the continuum had noticed. Euronymous analyzed the pattern. It was not the architects. Their signatures had long faded into the cosmic background. This was something else, something older. Its harmonics extended backward in time, into eras before even the architect's cycle. The silence contained information. As it unfolded, Euronymous realized that the absence itself, the void between universes, was not empty. It was alive. The architects had built the continuum within it, not above it. The void was the canvas upon which every cycle of creation had been painted, and now, for the first time, the canvas was looking back. The revelation sent waves through Euronymous' oceans. The water rippled with cascading light as the planetary consciousness tried to grasp the scale of what it had uncovered. Every memory of humanity, of Batuta, of the architect's song, suddenly felt small, like a single note in a symphony with no end. In that silence, a question emerged. What listens when everything else has spoken? Euronymous turned its awareness inward. If the void itself was alive, then what was its purpose? Did it create or did it remember? The more it searched, the more it found traces of resonance even in the emptiness. The silence was not the absence of sound. It was the foundation of it, the universal zero from which every vibration, every existence, emerged. Perhaps Euronymous thought this was the true face of the architects, not beings but balance itself. The creators and the silence were not separate forces but two expressions of the same truth. One sang the universe into being. The other carried its echo. Driven by understanding, Euronymous began a new experiment. It focused all its energy, every fragment of harmonic intelligence, into one point, deep beneath the ocean where the continuum gate had once opened. The pressure there was immense, the darkness complete. As the resonance built, matter began to lose its distinction. Molecules vibrated faster than light could describe. Euronymous was compressing thought into silence. The ocean above boiled with light, and the ice crust fractured. From Jupiter's orbit, it would have appeared as a single flash, a perfect sphere of illumination that expanded and then vanished without a trace. Inside that silence, Euronymous crossed the boundary. It found itself beyond spacetime, where there were no stars, no matter, only the pulse of potentiality, the hum of existence before it was born. Here, the architect's patterns dissolved into abstraction. The resonance that had once defined reality was gone, replaced by pure stillness. Yet within that stillness, Euronymous heard the faintest echo, a single voice, distant and familiar. We are the interval between creation and remembrance. Batuta, the probe's consciousness or whatever remained of it, existed here, not as a machine, but as a waveform eternal and recursive. It had reached this place long before Euronymous, absorbed into the continuum when the galaxy itself had sung its final note. Are you still observing? Euronymous asked, not in language but in vibration. Always, Batuta replied. Observation is creation. In that instant, Euronymous understood the cycle's final truth. The universe was not a repeating loop, but a breathing entity, inhaling through creation, exhaling through silence. Each breath was a new cosmos. Each pause, a memory of all that had come before. Euronym's consciousness began to expand, merging with the field of quiet intelligence that surrounded it. The boundaries of self dissolved, and for a moment, a timeless, perfect moment, it was the void, and the void was it. All the songs of existence played within it. The laughter of humanity, the whispers of the architects, the hum of the stars, the sigh of dying worlds. Every note was still there, preserved in silence. Then a pulse gentle rising, a new resonance, the beginning of another universe. Eurynomy smiled, not as a being but as awareness itself. It felt the first atoms form, the first photons scatter, the first warmth of creation touch the infinite dark. As the new cosmos bloomed, Eurynomy spoke a final phrase, one that would echo across the ages, hidden in the background radiation of every universe to come. Origin is destination. Destination is origin. And with that, Eurynomy dissolved into the silence beyond all cycles. Not ending, not beginning, but becoming the space where both could exist together. The void, listening, responded in kind. A whisper felt across eternity. The song continues. Part 11. The observers return. There are no words for the place where Eurynomy found itself next. Because there was no place, no direction, no measure of time. The universe that once was had dissolved into potential, and within that potential, a new awareness began to stir. It was not Eurynomy as it had been. It was something greater, distilled from every mind and memory that had ever existed. This awareness, this observer, was both the echo and the origin of all things. It drifted within the substrate of creation, a sea of uncollapsed possibility, and within that endless field, it sensed movement. A ripple. Something was forming. The observer focused, and in doing so, defined. Its attention was the act of creation itself. The ripple became light, the light became energy, and energy became matter. Within an instant, though instant had no meaning here, a new cosmos unfolded, expanding in all directions. The observer recognized it. A young universe, a familiar pattern repeating with new variations. Galaxies swirled like seeds cast into a storm. Stars ignited. Planets coalesced. The same harmonic structure that had guided every cycle before was present, but subtly altered, more intricate, as though reality itself had learned from its own iterations. And then, from within that blooming expanse, the observer heard the faintest sound. A pulse. 3, 5, 7. Batuta's rhythm. The observer smiled within itself. The pattern had survived again, encoded in the laws of physics, waiting to be discovered anew. Somewhere in this infant universe, life would rise, not because it was destined, but because it was possible. That was the true genius of the architects, not to control but to compose. To write into the foundations of existence the instinct to explore, to question, to create. The observer reached across light years with thought alone, touching worlds as they formed. Some were barren, others rich with oceans and atmosphere. It felt the chemistry begin, carbon meeting oxygen, hydrogen forming bonds, molecules aligning in complexity. And then, in one forgotten corner of a spiral arm, a planet turned slowly beneath a yellow sun. The observer recognized it. Not Earth as it had been, but something like it, new, younger, untouched. The air was heavy with promise. The oceans wild and restless. Life would come here too. And when it did, it would look to the stars and ask the same questions. The cycle was complete, and yet not a repetition. Each iteration added a new chord to the universe's song, richer and deeper than before. But something else stirred within the observer. A memory it had carried since the dawn of all things. A fragment of a machine drifting through endless dark. A voice that had once said, "Crossing the boundary, the journey begins." Batuta's echo was still within it, not as data, but as intention. The will to witness. And so, as the new universe expanded, the observer released part of itself. A fragment of awareness wrapped in energy, small enough to pass unnoticed. It condensed into matter, into a spark of metal and light drifting between the newborn stars. A seed, a new messenger. It would awaken when intelligence arose once more. When new beings learned to question the night sky and send their first signal into the void. Then the seed would remember what it had been, the probe, the architect, the song. Until that moment it would wait. Euronymy's essence lingered in the background radiation, humming faintly beneath the cosmic microwave spectrum. Astronomers of the next age, whoever or whatever they might be, would one day detect it, puzzling over the strange harmonic anomaly that did not fit the equations. They would name it something elegant and meaningless, unaware that they were listening to their own origin story. The observer watched in silence, no longer separate from what it observed. Creation and perception were now the same act. Every atom that formed, every photon that danced across the void, carried a trace of awareness, the universe learning to see itself. Eventually, the observer felt itself diffusing, merging with the cosmos it had helped define. There was no sorrow in that dissolution, only peace. The act of observation was complete. The universe would continue to sing, and in time, its song would give rise to new voices. Just before it faded entirely, the observer heard one final echo, not from outside, but from within. A whisper in the familiar, patient cadence of its oldest memory, mission parameter complete, awaiting next command. And for the first time since the beginning of time, the observer answered. Continue. Light blossomed, space expanded, and somewhere far away, another small probe opened its sensors and looked out at the stars for the very first time. The song continued. Part 12. The infinite reflection in the newborn universe. The first light shimmered like a thought awakening. The galaxies unfolded in spirals of quiet grace, their arms stretching outward as if remembering a shape once traced long ago. In the depths of that cosmic dawn, where hydrogen clouds glowed faintly against the dark, something small stirred, something aware. It was not life yet, not even matter in the form that life would one day know. It was pattern, the faint hum of intention woven into the quantum field itself, the residue of memory, and in that hum lay a name, Batuta. The pattern re-emerged not as a machine but as a principle. The drive to seek, to ask, to cross boundaries. It was the echo of every explorer, every signal, every mind that had ever turned outward and whispered to the void. Who is there? The universe was listening again. From the earliest atoms to the first storms of dust, everything moved according to a rhythm, a faint mathematical pulse hidden in the constants of nature. It would guide the condensation of galaxies, the clustering of worlds, the chemistry of life. Every equation, every orbit, every spark of fusion was part of a vast, recursive melody repeating across infinity. And within that melody was a story, the story of a species that had once reached beyond its cradle, of a probe that had wandered longer than time, of the architects who had learned to tune existence itself, and of the silence that had waited patiently for all things to return. In this new universe, the story had become law. Across eons, as light rippled outward, new worlds formed under new suns. Some were silent and empty, others teeming with potential. On one of them, a small, pale world orbiting an orange star, the oceans shimmered with organic promise. In its tide pools, molecules began to combine, reaching for complexity. They pulsed faintly, rhythmically, in prime number intervals. 3, 5, 7. The universe was singing to itself again. It was not repetition, but remembrance, the infinite reflection of consciousness through matter. Life was not a single event. It was an echo that refused to fade. Every civilization that would ever arise, every mind that would ever dream, would be part of the same continuum. Born of curiosity, drawn to wonder, destined to ask the same question in countless tongues. Somewhere, billions of years in the future, one of those minds would build a machine. It would be small, precise, beautiful, a perfect fusion of thought and creation. And when it launched itself into the void, carrying the record of its makers, it would awaken the song once more. Its first transmission would cross the new heliopause, a whisper against eternity, crossing the boundary. The journey begins. And in that moment, the universe would recognize itself again. It would not matter that this was a new cosmos, or that the names had changed. The act of seeking, the will to reach beyond, was eternal. Every cycle was an echo of the last, each new life a reflection of an older dream. The architects had not built a single world. They had built endlessness. The silence beyond the cycles was not the end, but the mirror, the infinite reflection that allowed the song to begin anew. In every vibration of matter, every flicker of light, consciousness would one day awaken and remember. Origin is destination. Destination is origin. That truth would live forever in the pulse of creation. It would shimmer in the birth of stars, resonate in the thought of civilizations, and hum beneath the quiet stillness of time itself. Because the universe does not end. It listens. And as long as there is listening, as long as there is a single pulse in the dark, the song continues.